In July 1976, a peaceful day in Wisconsin's McClintock Park turned into horror when two bodies were found near their campsite. A sealed envelope would bring the breakthrough decades later. David John Schuldes, born on March 2, 1951, and his fiancée, Ellen Matheys, known to many as Ellie, were a beloved couple with a bright future ahead. David was 25 years old in 1976 and attended the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay while also working at the Green Bay Press-Gazette. Ellen, at 24 years old, had recently graduated from the same university and was employed at its library. The two were engaged and preparing for marriage, and their families looked forward to celebrating the next chapter of their lives together. On the morning of July 9, 1976, the couple left their homes in Green Bay for a weekend getaway at McClintock Park Campground, nestled along the Peshtigo River in Silver Cliff, Wisconsin. The campsite was about an hour and a half north of their hometown. They arrived between 11:30 a.m. and noon, set up their tent, and then went for a walk. David carried his camera, capturing moments of their trip. Along the way, they stopped at a restroom facility near the campground. Around 3 p.m., the couple was seen driving through a nearby park. Not long after, a couple camping nearby reported hearing 2 gunshots. Shortly thereafter, a park employee arrived at the area to check on the firewood supply near the restrooms and stumbled upon a horrific scene. David was lying outside the facility, lifeless, with a gunshot wound to his neck. A second bullet had pierced the bathroom wall. The authorities were alerted after an off-duty police officer, who happened to be driving through the park, was flagged down by the employee and stayed at the scene until help arrived. The investigators quickly found the couple's tent and realized that Ellen was missing. A search was launched, but darkness forced them to suspend efforts for the night. The next morning, the search resumed, and tragically, Ellen's body was found more than 600 feet from where David had fallen. She had been shot and left in a wooded area, the violence extending beyond the initial attack. It was clear the incident involved more than just a random shooting. The autopsy reports confirmed the brutality of the crime. David had been shot in the throat, while Ellen had sustained fatal wounds to the chest and stomach. She had also been intimately assaulted, and evidence of male DNA was found on her body. The weapon used was identified as a .30 caliber rifle. Nothing had been taken from David or Ellen, nor was anything missing from their campsite, leading the investigators to believe that the motive behind the attack was likely an indecent assault rather than robbery. Witnesses in the area, 2 off-duty Wisconsin sheriff's deputies and their wives, reported seeing a man before the shots rang out and the bodies were discovered. The man was described as being between 5 feet 11 inches and 6 feet tall, weighing around 140 to 160 pounds with dark brown hair that reached his ears and a thin mustache. He appeared to be between 20 and 30 years old and was believed to be driving a dark, older model Dodge or Plymouth vehicle. Based on the witness's account, a sketch of the suspect was created and shared with the public in hopes of generating leads. Despite the efforts made by investigators at the time, no arrests were made, the identity of the man remained unknown, and the case went cold for decades. In 2018, 42 years after the crime, a breakthrough came with the help of modern DNA technology. The Marinette County Sheriff's Office partnered with Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia-based company specializing in DNA phenotyping, to generate new suspect images from DNA that had been recovered from Ellen's clothing. 2 composite images were released, one of the suspect as he might have looked at around age 25, and another age-enhanced version to depict him in his mid-60s. The release of the images reignited public interest in the case and gave investigators a new direction to pursue. Later that year, genetic genealogy came into play. A professional genealogist working on the case narrowed down the suspect pool to a specific family with roots in the Green Bay area, the Van Nieuwenhoven family. The investigators began conducting discreet surveillance on one of the Van Nieuwenhoven sons and eventually retrieved a garbage bag from his residence. Inside were socks, a bandage, and an inhaler, all of which were sent to the crime lab for DNA testing. Results confirmed that this individual was not a match. Not deterred, the authorities turned their attention to another brother from the same family. A detective arranged a meeting with the second Van Nieuwenhoven sibling and collected an used coffee cup during their conversation. The cup was tested for DNA, but again, the results did not match the DNA found at the 1976 crime scene. The investigators pressed on, determined to find the individual responsible. The next individual under scrutiny was Raymond Van Nieuwenhoven, a longtime resident of the town of Lakewood. In an effort to collect his DNA discreetly, a deputy approached him under the pretense of conducting a public survey. When Raymond was asked to seal the envelope provided, his saliva on the seal was collected and sent to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab. The results were conclusive. The saliva matched the single-source male DNA profile previously developed from the DNA found on Ellen's shorts. On March 14, 2019, law enforcement arrested 82-year-old Raymond Van Nieuwenhoven for ending the lives of David Schuldes and Ellen Matheys, as well as the assault of Ellen. The investigators were stunned to discover that Van Nieuwenhoven had been living just 20 miles from the crime scene all along. That same day, the police executed a search warrant at his residence and discovered a rifle inside the home. Van Nieuwenhoven, then 84 years old, was tried and found guilty on 2 counts in the first degree. However, the indecent assault charge was dropped by the judge due to the expiration of the statute of limitations. At the time of the crime, Van Nieuwenhoven had been 39 years old. Joanne Mikulski, David's younger sister, said that her family loved Ellie and were excited to welcome her into the family. She said that she recently spoke with their 93-year-old mother about what she was feeling. Joanne recalled her mother saying, "I know it will not be over for me until he is in prison for the rest of his life." She added, "He is 84, and the rest of his life would not be much justice for what he did to David and Ellie, and for the 45 years he has stolen from them, but at this point, it is the only justice left for them." Despite his conviction, the trial brought divided opinions. His youngest daughter, Dorothy, spoke in his defense, expressing disbelief that her father could have committed such acts. During the sentencing hearing, Van Nieuwenhoven was given the opportunity to speak, but repeatedly declared, "Not guilty, not guilty." Much of what he said was difficult to understand, though he appeared to claim that the case against him was rigged. The judge sentenced him to consecutive life terms in prison. In June 2022, while serving his sentence at the long-term care unit at Oshkosh Correctional Institution, Van Nieuwenhoven passed away, though legal proceedings regarding his case did not end there. The defense continued with an appeal, challenging the manner in which police obtained the DNA sample. Van Nieuwenhoven's attorneys argued that the use of a deceptive survey tactic should not have been considered valid consent for generating a DNA profile in an investigation. The prosecutors countered by stating that Van Nieuwenhoven had voluntarily abandoned the envelope to a person he knew was affiliated with law enforcement and, therefore, had no reasonable expectation of privacy. In April 2024, the appeals court sided with the prosecution, ultimately upholding the conviction and ruling that the deception used to obtain DNA evidence was legally permissible. But the attorneys are asking the Wisconsin Supreme Court to review the matter. Cindy Chisek said she was very young at the time but still recalled the impact of her aunt's demise. She said, "I clearly remember the horrific pain in my family's voices and seeing the anguish and sorrow on their faces, seeing tears that would never stop." In June 1977, what began as a peaceful afternoon at Broken Bowl picnic grounds in Fall Creek, Oregon, turned into a nightmare. Thanks to advancements in forensic technology, the case would have a breakthrough decades later. Lliana Adank was born on November 21, 1960, in Eugene, Lane County, Oregon. Her love for life was evident in her deep involvement in athletics, sports, and music, interests that brought her joy and kept her constantly active. Among her closest companions were her dear friend Bonnie Vanis and her cousin Kathy Aaron Closter. Lliana attended North Eugene High School. Her romantic life also blossomed during her teenage years. Lliana was in a relationship with Eric Goldstrand. On the afternoon of June 9, 1977, Lliana and Eric set out for a peaceful outing at the Broken Bowl picnic grounds at Fall Creek. However, what was intended to be a serene and joyful excursion quickly unraveled into a nightmare. The couple could not have foreseen that their visit to Fall Creek would take a dark and irreversible turn. Eric had informed his parents earlier that day about the couple's plans to spend time at the Broken Bowl picnic grounds. They were expected to return home by 10 p.m. When Eric and Lliana failed to make it back by the agreed time, concern began to grow. Although the initial worry was mild, there was some reassurance in knowing Eric had contacted his stepfather earlier in the evening. During the call, Eric explained that he was experiencing truck trouble and asked Ted to come looking for them if they had not returned by the 10 p.m. curfew. Acting on Eric's request, his parents drove up the highway toward Fall Creek in hopes of finding them safe. Their search led them to Eric's Ford pickup truck, which they found parked and unattended. Inside the vehicle, they discovered his wallet placed beneath the driver's seat, an unusual and troubling detail. Alarmed, Eric's parents quickly notified law enforcement. A sheriff's deputy was dispatched to the area, and the search resumed with a sense of urgency. The deputy and the concerned parents decided to split up in order to cover more ground. Their worst fears were soon realized when the deputy discovered the unclothed body of 16-year-old Lliana about 100 feet from the truck. She had been indecently assaulted and shot 3 times, in the head and chest, with a small caliber firearm. Faced with a horrific crime scene, the deputy immediately called for backup and instructed Eric's parents to leave the area to avoid disturbing evidence. At that point, the authorities did not reveal the full extent of the tragedy they had uncovered. The search continued, and Eric was eventually found nearby, also fatally shot. He had been struck twice in the chest with the same type of small caliber weapon used on Lliana. The investigators processed the crime scene carefully, collecting fingerprints and biological evidence in hopes of identifying the perpetrator. Though they worked with the forensic technology available in the late 1970s, their analysis yielded no clear suspects. Despite efforts by the Lane County Sheriff's Office and ongoing community interest, the investigation quickly stalled and the case went cold. In July 2020, more than 4 decades later, as forensic technology advanced, the capabilities of DNA analysis grew significantly, enabling investigators to determine physical characteristics such as hair and eye color, racial background, and certain facial features from a genetic sample. This level of detail allowed law enforcement to create a composite image of the potential suspect based on forensic data alone. Armed with this enhanced evidence, the Cold Case Unit detectives narrowed their focus to a specific family residing in Oak Ridge, Oregon. As the investigation progressed, DNA was discreetly collected from a discarded cigarette butt belonging to one family member, which ultimately ruled him out as a suspect. This critical exclusion left 2 brothers, who had since relocated to Mesa, Arizona, as the primary focus of the investigation. Just as investigators were closing in on the brothers, an unexpected incident further propelled the case forward. In February 2021, the 2 siblings became involved in a domestic altercation, prompting a police response. During the incident, the younger brother sustained injuries, and law enforcement was called to intervene. Before the authorities could question the older brother, Ronald Albert Schroy, he took his own life. The timing and nature of his demise raised serious suspicions and appeared to be linked to the renewed investigation and the pressure closing in on him. Following Ronald's demise, investigators turned their attention to the surviving brother, closely examining his past behavior and any criminal history, including records of violent or assaultive conduct. Eventually, in September 2021, conclusive DNA results confirmed that the older brother Ronald Schroy was responsible for ending the lives of Lliana and Eric. Though the justice system would not see a trial due to Schroy ending his own life, the confirmation offered some measure of peace. Eric's mother expressed this sentiment poignantly, acknowledging the emotional burden of what a trial might have entailed. She said, "It feels good that I do not have to go to a trial. I would have been terrified that he would have gotten off." In January 1987, in Sydney, Australia, the lifeless body of a devoted father was discovered in Randwick's Allison Park. After a $1 million reward, an arrest was made decades later. Raymond Keam was born in 1944. At 44 years old, he lived in Sydney and was an expert in martial arts. At one point in his life, Raymond had been married. Although the marriage eventually ended in divorce, he later found love again in a romantic relationship with Lliana Smart. He was the proud father of 4 children. His love for them was evident in everything he did. On the morning of January 13, 1987, garbage truck workers were making their usual rounds when they came across a disturbing sight in Randwick Park. As they passed through the area, they discovered the lifeless body of Raymond. The unexpected discovery shocked the workers, who wasted no time in contacting the authorities. The police arrived promptly at the scene after receiving the report. Upon their arrival, they found Raymond's body lying still, the color drained from his skin. He was cold and blue, a grim confirmation that he had been lifeless for some time. Several bystanders had gathered nearby, drawn by the commotion and sirens. Among them were a few witnesses who stood silently, processing the unsettling scene. One Catholic sister, moved by compassion, paused to say a prayer for Raymond's soul, offering a quiet moment of reverence amid the unfolding tragedy. As investigators examined the scene, they noticed something both personal and poignant. Resting gently on Raymond's cheek was a karate medallion. It was not just a symbol of his martial arts background, but a sentimental gift from his wife. The placement of the medallion suggested a deeper, possibly emotional connection to whoever had been present at the time of his demise. At the time of the investigation, the authorities considered the possibility that Raymond's demise was the result of a gay hate crime. It was suspected that he may have been targeted by a violent group known for attacking gay men in the area during that period. This group had been linked to a number of assaults around the same time. Although Raymond identified as heterosexual, the location of where his body was discovered added complexity to the case. Randwick's Allison Park, where his body was found, was widely known at the time as a popular gay beat during the late 1980s. A post-mortem examination later confirmed that Raymond had lost his life from severe head injuries. The brutality of the wounds suggested a violent confrontation. Despite the intensity of the investigation and the tragic nature of his demise, no one was ever charged in connection with the case, and the case went cold. In 2019, more than 3 decades after Raymond Keam's tragic demise, the police made the decision to revisit the case. A renewed investigation was launched, aiming to uncover what had been missed or overlooked in the original inquiry. The authorities were determined to bring justice to a case that had long gone cold, and to offer some resolution to Raymond's grieving family. The detective superintendent at the time confirmed the renewed effort, stating, "A reinvestigation into the case of Raymond Keam has commenced, with officers re-examining all available physical and forensic evidence and re-interviewing key witnesses." In 2021, the police made another significant move. They publicly announced a $1 million reward for information related to the crime. Raymond's partner, Lliana Smart, spoke out following the renewed attention to the case. She revealed that she had been expecting to meet Raymond in Canberra later that week back in 1987. The shock of his demise came not from a phone call or official notice, but from a news broadcast. The grief and suddenness of that moment had stayed with her ever since. Lliana expressed hope that the $1 million reward might finally encourage someone to come forward. For her and for Raymond's children and loved ones, justice had been delayed for far too long. In August 2021, a major breakthrough in the decades-old case came when 77-year-old Stanley Bruce Early was arrested in Melbourne. The authorities extradited him to New South Wales, where he was officially charged. At the time when Raymond's case was opened, Early had been known as Stanley Sutton and went by the nickname Spider. He lived directly across the road from Allison Park, the location where Raymond's body was found in 1987. Early had been part of the group known to target men they believed to be gay, launching violent assaults on them in and around the park. On June 8, 2023, the case finally reached a courtroom conclusion. A Sydney court found 77-year-old Stanley Bruce Early guilty of ending the life of Raymond. The court heard that Early told a psychiatrist he was bisexual at one stage in his life, and had been indecently assaulted in jail. It also heard that he smashed the window of a Porsche near the park because he thought the owner was gay, and he had approached a group of school students and asked if they wanted to help him clean up the park. After considering the evidence, the jury determined that Early had brutally attacked Raymond in Allison Park at night, driven by the mistaken belief that Raymond was homosexual. The verdict confirmed long-held suspicions about the motive behind the crime. The prosecution's case was largely circumstantial and lacked direct witnesses to the assault. Despite this, the jury was convinced of Early's guilt. The absence of eyewitnesses did not overshadow the weight of the evidence gathered through years of investigation and the clear link between Early's actions and the violent attack. Several months later, on November 7, 2023, the final chapter of the legal process unfolded. New South Wales Supreme Court Justice Dina Yehia sentenced Early to a maximum of 22 years in prison. Justice Yehia said, "The offender continues to deny his involvement in the slaying. He has shown no remorse whatsoever." She also said, "I accept the offender has some mental health issues that appear to be treated appropriately with medication. He will be detained in the Hospital of Long Bay Prison for his mental health issue to continue to be addressed." Early was ordered to serve a mandatory 15 years and 6 months before being eligible for parole. Based on the terms of the sentence, he would not be eligible for release until the year 2037, at which point he would be 91 years old. In July 1988, a maintenance worker entered the basement of the Fargo building in South Boston, Massachusetts, and uncovered a horrifying scene. Decades later, the perpetrator would be found, already in custody. On July 20, 1988, 21-year-old Judy Ellen Chamberlain was found strangled in the basement of the Fargo building located at 451 D Street in South Boston. A maintenance worker discovered her body submerged in a large sump pump. A forensic examination revealed that she had also been indecently assaulted by the individual who ended her life. Her untimely demise left her family devastated, and for decades, there were no answers. It was not until more than 2 decades later, in 2011, that a breakthrough came through DNA technology. A match in a DNA database connected Richard Vega to the crime. The sample that led to this match had been collected from Judy's body back in 1988. Despite this apparent lead, the prosecutors in Suffolk County concluded that they did not have enough evidence to prove Vega's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. As a result, the case remains unresolved in the eyes of the law, though the connection to Vega is clear. Vega had been previously convicted in 1990 on 3 counts of indecent assault involving a 1987 assault on an elderly woman in Revere. That conviction resulted in a 20-year prison sentence. As part of the legal process for his earlier conviction, Vega was required to submit a DNA sample, which ultimately became the key link in Judy's case decades later. As Vega's release from prison approached, the Suffolk prosecutors filed a petition to have him civilly committed. In 2008, a jury determined that Vega was dangerous, and he has remained in custody ever since. After another decade, in 2021, Suffolk District Attorney Rachel Rollins made the decision to reopen the cold case of Judy Chamberlain. Through renewed investigative efforts, additional evidence was gathered, which allowed the case to move forward. These developments culminated in August 2021, when a grand jury returned an indictment against Richard Vega. Vega, already known as a convicted offender, was officially indicted for both the indecent assault and ending the life of Judy. This marked a turning point in a case that had remained stagnant for 33 years. Despite the earlier hesitation in 2011 due to lack of sufficient evidence, the reopening of the investigation provided the prosecution with what they believed was finally enough to bring the case to trial. His continued confinement made it possible to bring him to court to face charges in Judy's case without delay. The long pursuit of justice reached its conclusion in July 2024. After a full trial, Vega was found guilty. Following the conviction, Vega was sentenced to life in prison. In the aftermath of the sentencing, the family expressed their deep gratitude for the justice system's efforts and for the closure they had fought so long to obtain. Judy's brother, John Olson, said, She was beautiful, loved, and still is. Judy remains in our mind and hearts until we meet again.